Ethinium's Vault, Steam and Aether, Book 1. Prologue. You have visual, Maloney?
Copy that, Sarge. I have visual, and it's wonderful.
Rip looked out through the view screen of his skimmer and had to agree with Maloney. The view was indeed wonderful. Well, let's not get too caught up with the sights and sounds of these new neural implants, boys and girls. We got a job to do in this newfangled wonderland. A string of replies came back over the comm. Yes, Sergeant. Rip pulled back on the wheel of his vehicle. Here in the NeuralNet, the latest version of the metaweb, everything truly was full immersion. While he and the others in his squad reclined on cots in the gaming center back at Fort Meade, apparently asleep to those in meat space, they traveled this world's neural pathways in military skimmers, armed to the teeth with virtual weapons. The difference, he thought, was that these weapons could hurt and kill in real life. What happens in the brain is interpreted by the rest of the body as real, thanks to the new implants. Several people had died in firefights and other intense encounters on NeuralNet before the public fully grasped the implications of violence in this digital playground. Then terrorists and the world's militaries got involved in squabbles in NeuralNet. It wasn't long before the Army's esports teams were repurposed for doing battle in this new immersive reality. And Rip's squadron had one of the best kill ratios against enemy forces online. Lightning-quick reflexes and years of online gaming honed their skills in this new environment. Military coders provided them with top-notch weaponry and vehicles, too. Coding in this advanced environment was a lot more labor-intense than traditional games required, but the U.S. Army has some of the best nerds in the world working for them, Rip thought with a smile.
Heads up, Sarge. We've got company at 2 o'clock.
I see it, Maloney. E-Squad, divert course for intercept. Let's check out the bogey. Specialist Debbie Maloney was one of the few female players on Rip's team, on any esports team in the U.S. Army for that matter. She took a lot of grief from the male-dominant group, but dang if she didn't kill more bad guys in NeuralNet than most of the rest of them combined. The 5 skimmers diverted course, racing across the rich, highly detailed and multicolored digital landscape. They maintained a V formation with Rip in the lead vehicle. Trees and mountains, even birds and flowers, were all rendered in high detail within this setting. Currently, they were west and north of the closest metropolis. Online New York, often referred to as ONYC, they were in an area labeled Wilderness on the maps. A spy satellite in the game noticed an incursion and sounded the alarm in real life. An unidentifiable vehicle approached the city. There were no authorized vehicles in this area, part of the North American Online Alliance. Thus, Rip and his team were sent to investigate. The flying object heading toward them looked huge.
What is that thing, Sarge?
Maloney's voice came over the comm, tinged with awe. I don't know, but it's not supposed to be here. They faced a giant floating platform, sleek lines racing back. It looked big and flat and aerodynamic.
That looks like a flattened blimp,
Joe Farmington said.
Maybe it's a mothership of some kind. I think I see things writing on it.
Rip said, whatever it is, you know it took a boatload of money to code. We're not looking at some kid playing around in his parents' basement. This is a government project, no doubt.
Yeah, but which government?
Farmington said.
The Ruskies? The Chicoms?
Unknown, but it's headed for the ONYC. Let's intercept and open a comm. Watch out for aggression and respond in kind.
Yes, Sergeant.
Rip made some adjustments on the skimmer's control panel, flicking a switch. Unidentified vehicle. You are encroaching on North American online airspace. Identify yourself and state your purpose. Silence.
Maybe they don't speak English, Sergeant.
Rip frowned and said, they should at least have translation software, Farmington. The formation flew closer, rapidly gaining on the sleek giant approaching them. Unidentified vehicle. State your purpose and affiliation. I repeat, you are in violation of our virtual airspace. No response. Rip spied multiple guns poking out the top of the giant oval platform now, as well as,
flyers are taking off from it, Sarge. I count 20.
I see them, Maloney. We faced worse odds before. All right, boys and girls. This counts as a hostile act. Engage with prejudice.
Yes, Sergeant.
The skimmers to either side of Rip peeled off, each picking targets. The enemy flyers swarmed them, but separated as they came close, with multiple vehicles clumping together to take on each army skimmer. Rip opened up with some short bursts from his phaser cannon. The big forward-facing gun spat out blue bolts of energy, tracing a path of destruction across the sky, instantly downing 2 enemy vehicles. Each skimmer carried 4 missiles. One of the reasons he was not too worried about their odds. His first one streaked after the nearest enemy flyer and detonated when it came within 5 meters. That's 3 down, Rip thought. I wonder how the others are doing. He caught a brief glimpse of 2 more missiles exploding, and Specialist Martin Prentice's ship blazing away at another flyer. The 18-year-old Prentice had terrible natural eyesight, not easily corrected via surgery. But here in the metaverse, that didn't matter, Rip thought. The neural connections trumped physical shortcomings. Good work, Prentice. That's why you're in E Squad. Copy that, Sergeant. Let's get these bastards. Rip heard a curse over the comm and looked out over the other side of his skimmer. Maloney's vehicle raced by, angling down and taking hits. She had 4 enemy flyers behind her, all firing away. Hang on, Maloney. I'm coming to help. Rip pushed the wheel down and angled off, coming up behind the flyers. He lined up the forward cannon on one and released all 3 of his remaining smart missiles. Simultaneous explosions lit up the digital sky. It's over, Maloney. You owe me. Thanks, Sarge. 4 beers on me later tonight. He grinned. That was their rule. 1 beer for each enemy you got off the other's tail. Heads up, Sergeant. Specialist Jeffrey Wellman's voice came over the comm. Rip looked around. Only a dozen enemies were left. What's up? Something else is taking off the big ship. I don't like the looks of this one, Sergeant. A huge flyer lifted off vertically from the top center of the giant platform. This one did not look very aerodynamic. It reminded Rip of the old battle helicopters, all loaded with missiles and guns. Only this one had no rotor on top. 2 sharp wings swept back from its center, like a bat. Lieutenant, are you seeing this, sir? Back in meat space, observing on a monitor in a darkened room, Lieutenant Harry Jaxon responded over the comm in his naval South Alabama drawl. I see it, Sergeant. Someone spent a gosh awful lot of time and money designing that thing. Looks like it's only there to kill skimmers. I want your squadron to take it out. Watch out for the side guns on that floating platform, though. As he spoke, one of the big weapons mounted on the mothership's side opened up, spewing out a burst of energy. Martin Prentice flew right into it. His skimmer lit up in red, and parts flew off in all directions. He spiraled quickly downward. I'm hit! I'm going down! Bail out, Marty! His avatar disappeared from NeuralNet just before the skimmer hit the ground and exploded. Everyone, stay on their toes. Whoever these people are, they mean business. Yes, Sergeant. Maloney, Farmington, on my wings. Wellman, keep the little guys off our tails. We're going to take the new player out. 3 skimmers looped up and out. Rip lined up his forward cannon, knowing the 2 on either side of him would do the same. Light 'em up! 3 phaser cannons blipped repeatedly, sending massive energy into the big flyer. It absorbed several hits before taking evasive measures, speeding up suddenly, then aiming its nose straight up in a 90-degree ascent. Whoa! We can't do that, Maloney said. It did not stop Rip from trying. He pulled up on the wheel, wishing he still had a smart missile left. The enemy flyer stopped and dropped, twisting like a broken top and aiming back down at the ground again. When Rip finally reached the apex of his loop, he saw 2 missiles zooming into his view screen. Sarge, bail! Everything exploded. Sarge! The lieutenant's calm voice came over the comm. He said, Get out of there, Maloney, all of you. That thing's too powerful. Maloney watched pieces of Rip's skimmer flutter to the ground. Then the giant flyer turned toward her and fired more missiles. She mentally activated her evac button. In the gaming center, she opened her eyes and gasped, consciousness flooding back into her body in the real world. She sat up, disconnecting the wire running up to the neural implant just below her right ear. She glanced to her left, where the sergeant would be lying, expecting to find him dead. Lieutenant? Lieutenant! Jaxon picked up a microphone. He stood behind a window overlooking the gaming room. A tall black man stared at her through the glass, and his voice came over a speaker. What is it, Maloney?
Where is he, sir? Where's his body?
They both turned and stared at an empty cot. The other members of E Squad woke up. Prentice put on his thick, army-issued glasses and squinted, checking under the cot and all around the room, but to no avail. The sergeant had disappeared. Chapter 1. Light crept under Rip's eyelids. He fluttered them open, trying to focus. Sensation came back all at once. He tilted his head up. The first thing he noticed, he was naked. Also, he was lying on his back on a concrete floor. He sat up, cheeks scraping the cold floor, and he looked around. What a drab place, he thought. Walls were uniformly metal and gray. They looked like they came from a tired old battleship. A wooden bench stretched across one wall, facing a phalanx of lockers. Everything looked old, worn, and in need of paint. Rip stood up, barefoot, and looked all around. Where'd my clothes go? Where am I? He scratched his head. Dirty blonde hair cut short in a military flat top. The wall opposite the lockers looked bare. Nothing but metal. So did the back wall. The front wall had a door, though, with a latch handle on it. Still confused, he walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked. Of course. He looked around the room and walked back to the lockers. He opened a couple, finding them empty. On the third try, he found a pair of overalls. What is this? A window opened in his mind's eye. You have found an ordinary pair of linen overalls. His eyes narrowed as he gazed at the readout. Is that my implant feeding me messages? It's gotta be. Am I in a new game or something? Shrugging, he sniffed the overalls gingerly. They smelled clean. Deciding prudence was the better part of valor. He put them on and covered himself. He opened 4 more lockers before finding a pair of boots. You have found a pair of ordinary workers' boots. Thank you, Mr. Obvious. He sat on the worn wooden bench and slipped his bare feet into the boots. To his surprise, they fit perfectly. So did the overalls, even though he stood an even 6 feet tall. Huh. What are the odds? He tried the door again, rattling the handle. He banged on it a few times. Hey! Anybody out there? Let me out! After a few minutes, he gave up. Looking around the room once more, he saw something in the corner he had overlooked earlier. A wrench. Don't tell me. I found a wrench. He walked over and picked it up. You have found an enhanced adjustable wrench. It can be used for a wide variety of tasks, even as a weapon in a pinch. Adjustable? Is that right? Well then, where's the little wheel to adjust it, He looked, could not find any way to adjust it. It looked to fit a 3/4 inch nut on one end, if his eyes did not deceive him, and a 1-inch nut on the other. But it did not look adjustable. Slowly, his gaze drifted back to the locked door as he gripped the wrench. All right. I played this type of game before. He walked over to the door and popped the latch with the wrench as hard as he could. The lock broke with a clang and the door swung open. Right. That's how you do it. Rip slipped the wrench into one of the big pockets on the front of his overalls and stepped out into a hall. Like the room, the walls here looked drab and gunmetal gray. Dim lighting came from the sconces on the walls, set every 20 feet or so. He squinted at the closest one. Is that gas? It is. Gas lighting. What is this place? Confused, he took a few steps to the left and headed down the hall that way. It looked to be very long, with doorways interspersed between the lights. The hall curved in the distance. The first door he came to was on the right. It looked identical to the one he opened. He tried the handle and found it locked too. Rip shrugged, his bare shoulders moving under the overalls. He kept going. He walked about 100 feet, he estimated, trying 5 different doors, 2 on the right, 3 on the left. They were all locked. On his way to the 6th door, he heard a woman scream. He broke into a run and approached the entrance, which appeared to look exactly like all the others. The woman screamed again. A horrendous sound, filled with dread and despair. Rip rattled the handle and found it locked, as expected. He pulled out the wrench and bashed the latch, breaking it. He pulled it open in one smooth motion. Inside, in the dim light, he saw cages lining the back wall of a slightly larger room than the one where he woke up. The cells were tiny, the size of old-fashioned phone booths. 2 of them held men, one older fellow and one younger. The third on the far right held a beautiful young woman with long black hair and a horrified look on her face. Her scream split the air. A greasy, stooped-shoulder man stood in front of her, arms reaching through the bars. But no matter how often he tried grabbing her breasts, she somehow evaded his paws in the narrow space. "Don't make me come in there," he said with a leer. Rip noticed the man wore similar light blue overalls as he had found in the locker room. These were dirty and stained, though. The man stank, like he had just spent hours in the bowels of a mechanical beast. In his mind, Rip named him Oily. He turned lazily to look at Rip, standing there with a wrench in his hand. "Where's your shirt? No matter. You can help me get some before you go on shift." He pulled out a keychain with a malicious grin and turned back to the woman's cage. "Get away from there." Oily turned again to look at Rip. "Look, I know the boss said hands off until he comes back with the suits, but ain't no one gonna mind if we get us some. I just got off shift and I want her. How? You gonna help me? Or just watch?" A switch went off inside Rip at the words. Without even thinking, he pulled his arm back and threw the wrench at the man. It sailed across the room and thunked into his forehead, sinking halfway into Oily's skull. The dirty old man dropped to the floor without a word, blood pooling on the concrete. Chapter 2. Everyone gaped at the fresh corpse. Then the people in cages turned to stare at Rip. Sorry. I didn't know that was going to happen." The woman did not look happy at all. "Idiot! I almost had him opening my door. I had everything under control." This statement confused Rip. He blinked, uncertain what to say. She had a clipped accent that sounded vaguely British. "That must be an enhanced wrench, worker," the older man said while gripping the bars. He likewise had an accent that seemed British. He had short gray hair and light gray eyes, giving his face a distinctive appearance. "But I'm not so sure you're really a steam worker, are you?" The woman said, "Yeah, he's not wearing a shirt." "No, my name is Sergeant Ripley Coulter, E Squadron, United States Army Medicorps. Where the heck am I?" No one answered right away. All 3 stared at him with looks bordering on incredulous mixed with curiosity. The younger man broke his silence. "Can't say I've heard of you as Army, but he do look like a soldier, Colonel." The older man nodded and said, "Carries himself like one, too." "Can you 2 please dissect him another time? Hey, Muscles, grab the keys off that dip you just whacked and get us out of these cages. They're suppressing us." Rip walked over and gingerly pulled the keys from the dead man's hand. "You have looted ordinary keys." Yeah. The woman, who looked even more attractive up close, even with rumpled clothes and in need of a bath, raised a questioning eyebrow. Rip blushed, quickly trying out keys in the lock. Fortunately, he found the right one quickly, and he pulled open her door, the rusty hinges squealing in protest. She stepped out and patted him on the cheek with a warm hand. "Thanks, Sergeant. If we get out of here, I'll let you buy me a drink." She did not seem at all flustered, unlike the hysterical screaming woman from moments ago. Even the bloody body on the floor did not seem to faze her. Slightly confused, Rip hurried and unlocked the colonel's cell door. He stepped out and shook Rip's hand. "Thank you, Sergeant." Rip nodded, looking into his eyes. He had to look up. The older man stood taller by a couple inches. Then he moved to the last cell. In contrast to the colonel, this guy stood shorter than Rip by several inches. He had a pleasant face, with light brown hair that was longer than the other 2 men's combined. "Introductions are in order," the colonel said. The young lady you rescued while she was trying to break us out is Lady Blair Brooke, one of the best spies in King Allow's court. She smiled at him, dark blue eyes gleaming. Rip furrowed his brows and said, Spy? In response, she looked him up and down, as if examining a piece of meat. I spy someone quite delectable. Her mood seemed to change now that she was out of the cage, Rip thought. Yes, carrying on. To my right is Robert Chance. He's an infiltrator extraordinaire. Pleased to meet you, Sergeant. Chance gave him a careless salute and a smile combined with a smirk. Infiltrator? What kind of... And I'm Baron Swarthmore, Colonel Thomas Bixby of His Majesty's Royal Army, 3rd Cavalry, proudly serving the home front for Greater Umbria. Crown and country. He snapped his heels and gave a smart salute, elbow sticking out perpendicularly from his hand. It was Rip's turn to stare blankly for a moment. Umbria? Greater Umbria, formed centuries past when Northumbria took over everything. Rip scratched his head and decided to stop asking single-worded questions. Okay. Are you all NPCs or something? Because if so, the programming is awesome, I gotta say. Chance and Blair exchanged glances, then looked back at Rip. Don't worry, Colonel, Blair said, slipping her arm inside the crook of Rip's elbow. I'll get a few drinks in him, and he'll stop blabbing nonsense. Bixby cleared his throat. Be that as it may, now that we've escaped, let us continue our mission, Sergeant Coulter. You might want to retrieve that wrench. If it is enhanced, it will no doubt continue proving useful. Chance, take the keys from the sergeant and see if you can find my map of this place. The socketmonger stored our stuff in this chest, Colonel. I think this here's the key for it. While Chance opened a lockbox nearby, Blair took the opportunity to move closer to Rip. Thank you for rescuing me, she whispered. I'm not sure you really needed it. I never pass up an opportunity to let someone else do all the work, Muscles. Rip looked down at the corpse and grimaced. The wrench stuck out from the dead man's forehead, shining dully in the dim light. Guess I need to get that. I'll get it for you. It's the least I could do. Blair reached down and grasped the wrench, pulling it free from the forehead with a sucking sound as brain tissue released its grip. She wiped it off on the worker's greasy overalls, smearing them red, then handed it back to Rip. Thanks. Thank you for killing him for me. That's another thing you saved me from today, muscle man. She smiled at him sweetly and batted her eyelashes. Chance handed the colonel a folded-up piece of paper while strapping a backpack on. Then he handed a satchel to Blair. Your map, sir. And your equipment, Lady Brooke. Sounds drifted through the door Rip left open, like drums on metal plates. Bixby said, That might be trouble. Let's see what's going on there. Together, all four approached the door. Chance cautiously stuck his head out, then snapped it back. Sewer trooper, sir. Bixby frowned and said, That figures. At least they didn't see you. While he spoke, Rip leaned out for a look. A long string of men dressed in brown leather overcoats, wearing dark green helmets and gas masks, tromped down the narrow corridor two abreast, beady eyes behind the glass of masks locked on Rip. Halt! He pulled back and slammed the door shut. I guess we better bar this thing. Is there another way out? Colonel Bigsby looked annoyed. Chance smirked. Blair smiled, but rolled her eyes. Boots thrumming on metal plates sounded louder as the troopers picked up their pace.